This is the Farm Voices podcast, sharing information about regenerative agriculture, climate resilience, and agricultural policy in the United States. We're joined again by Ryan Poe, farmer and founder of the Hungry Locavore in Ann Arbor, Michigan. This is the second half of our conversation. Would you share an example of one of your incredible menus?
Yeah, so on the menus, we do a little bit of everything. The menus are oftentimes themed. So having a travel background, I've probably been to about 50 different countries. I've farmed in probably about 10 of them. I like to bring that biodiversity to my newsletter, as well as the creativity of like the contents of the menus. So we'll do like Southeast Asian menus. We'll do India, like curry style menus, pizza kits. When we did a pizza kit with some local flour that was organic, that was run by a traditional row crop farmer, they're kind of in a new endeavor. So we got a local Italian guy to do a pizza crust that was already pre-baked, and then we had all the peppers, onions, and then he got local ham from a farm here. We created this take and bake pizza style. Those menus were just unbelievable because who's going to say no to a pizza? And then it's all local ingredients. And then obviously we had like salads and things that kind of went together with the pizza. And one thing about all the menus is we try to braid everything together. So if there's produce in there, that produce is going to definitely complement that prepared food. So in the newsletter, we walk people through how to consume the food and pace themselves for a 5-day, 3 meals a day type setting. And it's very helpful because a lot of people, they don't know what to do with like a cellar rack rate. And that's the other thing that I really love to do is I love to throw in 6 to 7 safe produce items. And then I always try to give you 1 or 2 curveballs, like things that are non-conventional, things you don't see in the grocery store, things that most people would probably walk by a million times and never buy it. Now we're just going to put it in there, and then we're going to explain like how you cook it and how you use it. And taking a step farther back there, one thing I forgot to mention about my homestead bringing up was my grandma was a professional chef in a very white America setting, and all of her friends were Indian, Mexican, Chinese, African, and they would come over and cook in our farm kitchen. And at a very young age, I was exposed to all of that culinary scene where a traditional barbecue for us would be hamburgers and hot dogs and potato salads and coleslaw. Whereas when my grandma's friends would come over, now we're eating pad thai and Szechuan noodles and tacos. And that was before the golden age of every restaurant was at your fingertip. That was like, you didn't eat that food unless somebody in your community that you knew and were invited over to have it. That's how you got exposure to it. So I lean a lot into those memories of canning, pickle, processing, and then having those chefs in our kitchen and just watching what they do and how they do it. And there's a lot of muscle memory with that associates with the chefs that I work with as well. I'll go in and I'll meet these chefs and we'll try 1 or 2 samples. And I basically can look at the rest of the menu and I can be like, this is going to be this guy's strong suit. And these are the things we should probably stay away from this chef. And we basically just use those footnotes as we develop the menus. And it is fascinating, because you see the rewards and the compliments you get from the people that come back. And they're like, man, you're either guessing really, really good or you're trying all this food before you buy it. And that's one thing I don't do is I don't try it all before I buy it because I couldn't afford to do that. It wouldn't be cost effective as a business owner. So there's a lot of muscle memory, which coincides with farming. You forget things in the beginning of the season that become alarmingly apparent in the middle of the season. But that's why I'm a good note taker as well. So like when I plant my fields, I always have an atlas. I always have the north, south, east, west. I have the length of the beds. Everything is input onto a piece of paper. And that basically just tells me like when I planted it, when I harvested it, what kind of pests were on it. All that stuff is on those notepads. So a lot of that, again, is like reinforcing the muscle memory of the process of doing it year after year after year after year. And you just basically hone your skills and you get better at it.
In establishing the geographic range of the Hungry Locavore, could you tell us the boundaries or the the area that you're covering?
So in general, I try to stay within just Southeast Michigan, just this far southern corner here, Southeast corner. There's plenty of producers and there's plenty of restaurants. We still meet people every week. To date, I've probably worked with about 250 local businesses here now in the life of the project. I do that for multiple reasons. One, it's not cost effective for me to drive over to like the west side of the state to pick up blueberries or peaches just because it would look good in the box. Sometimes, you just got to look within your own community and just keep using your network that you already have, and you can find those avenues to that produce. I'm also trying to be mindful of our carbon output. You know, when we do these boxes, one, I don't want to drive a ton of miles and add more fossil fuels to the grid, even though I am consolidating food and servicing a pretty large demographic as a one-man band. But I also would like to reduce that even farther. Like in the summertime, we're generally about 20-mile radius and probably more so like 15-mile radius of actually where the food is grown and where the food is handed out. Um, as we get into the winter, sometimes we have to go farther, and that's just because it's a bear market. And the scale of farms in Southeast Michigan, the property of Washtenaw County is rather expensive, and Wayne County, so there's not actually like high density large farms. A lot of these are small market farms where they work the season and then they pretty much shut off by like Christmas, and then they come back on board in like April. So some of that has implications on that, but in general, yes. The whole idea is to be carbon neutral with the food project eventually, and we're getting very close to that. And just trying to keep the money as close to home. Really, that's the bigger vision. It's like if we can get the farms and the chefs within our community, the chances that these people will buy a box and go and support them directly are a lot higher than if we start going farther away. And that is the bigger target. We're just trying to draw money back into the economy. To date, I just ran my numbers last night. Uh, in the 8 years of the project, we've spent over $1 million in wholesale sales back into the local community. So I thought we'd get there sooner. The pandemic era really pushed those numbers. During the pandemic era, we did about $650,000 in the 3 years of the pandemic back into the local community. As the project now and the Hungry Locavore starts to take off after doing it for just over a year now, it's looking like we're going to consistently start to put larger inputs back into our circular economy, which I like to call hyper-local circular food economy.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. And so this is the intertwined economic mission and ecological mission.
Yep. That is correct. Yep. So, the planet is changing rapidly. We just went over 1.5 Celsius, which was a 2050 target. And now we've just had some of the worst years on record back to back to back. The misuse of land management is definitely contributing to that. Like the fires in Los Angeles. The irony is that those people have millions of dollars, but they don't even know how to protect their landscape in a dry, arid desert. And I know this firsthand because I spent almost half my adult life in that neighborhood around those areas. And it's like you're going to invest millions of dollars in homes, but you're not going to do anything to prevent the natural landscape from basically spiraling out of control. And then you get a wildfire and your house burns down. A lot of that stuff could have been prevented through having better agroforestry, erecting like a group of private citizens just to monitor the situation. And I think those are going to be relevant things that are going to span across the whole country. I mean, even the Great Lakes impact, the biggest economy in the United States is the Great Lakes. A lot of people don't know that, but the shipping lanes and all that stuff that's moving through there. But like even yesterday, they were talking about whitefish and how the two invasive mussel species that came out of ships' bilges here are basically pretty much almost going to extinct that fish if we don't figure out our fishery systems in the next 5 years. But where I'm going with all this stuff is as the system gets more impacted and there's more damage and more blighting of those systems, the repair to that could take a lot longer than people think, like in reality, doing boots on the ground, some of these projects could take decades to repair. So ecologically friendly is our narrative for sure. Trying to be as mindful as possible with the people that we work with and the practices that they participate in the field and how they interact with their systems. But also, like our trash line and things that we're putting back into this system. We try to keep our checks and balances as accurate as possible and reduce, reuse, upcycle. Like those are common words with our stuff. All the boxes we give the food in, we have about a 95% return rate on those boxes. So they're not just one-time use packaging. They're just like going out and then they come back and they go out and they come back. And we do case studies on our own about that. Like we write a name on the box. And then every time it comes back in, we just put another black mark next to that name, like a hashtag. So we can see how many times we've used that one box to export food out. The boxes can weigh anywhere from like 25 to 35 pounds. If we reuse that box, 60 times, we just saved a ton of diversion away from landfills through recycling that, which is fascinating, because some new people to the project, they're like, oh, I threw that box away and I feel so guilty now, because it probably cost you like $3 a carton. And I was like, yeah, but, we don't know this stuff because nobody's teaching us, we're trying to be the ambassador to do the right thing. And that's part of the message through the newsletter is that we can all do a little bit better. And if we all consume a little bit less, it actually goes a long ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. This leads right into my next question, which was to ask about some of the other ways that your business impacts the local community and the farming community, and if there are any success stories you'd like to share.
With some of the smaller scale farms, we really try to engage them and the smaller scaled restaurants, just because everybody has to start somewhere. And to give them a chance to get into an email broadcast. So, like right now, there's about 2,000 people in our email broadcast. If people don't even buy the box, and we can see that 85% of the people open the menu. One, it's exposure on multiple levels because the 85% that did see the menu, now they've seen that business name, so that creates an opportunity for commerce there. And then if people buy the box, obviously that also doubles down on reinforcing that we're trying to work with a diverse crowd of people, but also trying to share, some of the underdog or some of the lesser known businesses out there. So some of that success story, it's fascinating to get upstart farms up off the ground and give them a place to market their goods. And it definitely seems like that's kind of the growing narrative. There's some really well established farms here, but there's a lot of younger people that are trying to find a way to get on the land and then trying to find a way to execute crop rotations and put them into the marketplace. So we really try to target a lot of that.
That's great. I want to shift a little bit and talk about the U.S. Farm Bill and the Inflation Reduction Act and the ways that we can be working to better support farmers and farm-related businesses like yours.
Yeah.
And first, I want to underscore the contributions that your business is intentionally making to economic development and to the hyperlocal food system, as well as providing the healthy food that sustains the community, makes us all healthier, is produced in a way that is responsible, it keeps our water and our land healthy, and provides ecosystem services. Like you're doing so much beyond providing the food. And it's important to recognize that. But have you been able to access grants or other types of funding to help you with farm operations or land improvements or business development?
I haven't really done too much in that arena. I have looked at grants before and grant writing and discussed it with people that have really dedicated a lot of their business aspect to grant writing. I don't have a ton of experience with that, to be 100% fair. I know there is a lot of opportunities out there. The farm that I work at is Sealy Farm again. Alex and Mark are the owners of that. Alex has taken her first offsite job in about 15 years. She started working with a transition to organic partnership with the USDA, which is also known as TOPP, and that is something directly related to the Farm Bill Act and grant writing. And the idea of that project is to get a senior locally certified organic farm to mentor a non-certified organic farm. Usually there's a little bit of an age gap there. Usually the older farmer is the one that's certified organic, and the younger farmer is just getting into the trade. So we're working with Alex on the farm. She's like, well, you're pretty well connected, and you know a lot of these farms, and we're just beginning this process. It started about a year ago. I think they're up to about 30 pairings now. So if you're certified organic, you get paid. Let's see here. I want to say I think it's $3,000 is what you get paid for 40 hours of mentor work with the non-certified farm. The non-certified farm gets paid $500 to go through the program, and then they provide also like grant writing resources if that's needed. They also provide paperwork insights on like how to apply for the certified organic process. And the idea is to basically try to get more people in control of regenerative or organic practices, and to try to be a little bit more mindful of the impact they do. It's been pretty successful. They honestly, I think their target was for 10 pairs to connect. And I think behind the scenes, I've helped them probably push another 15 or 20. So I think that program just in this area has produced about 30 partnerships, which again is fascinating because, some of these people that have done this for years and years and years now are transferring that knowledge to people that are just getting into this field. So it's kind of a hand holding program, which I think is pretty smart. And, you don't know all the ins and outs until somebody else has done a lot of that trial and error. So it's a good spot to put people in, without having to navigate blindly and trying to figure out like what's best for their model. And this offers that support system. That's exactly what it's geared for.
And focusing on building and supporting local food systems, what kinds of programs or funding for equipment, indoor space, etc., would be helpful to your business operations?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, most of the people that grow the food in this country don't own land. So I'm part of that demographic as well. I own a house in the suburb, but I don't have physical acreage to like grow on. And the cost of land in Washtenaw County is relatively expensive to get access for the equipment and things like that. In the farming world, there's definitely some education that goes into that. Some people are coming out of college with bachelor's degrees geared towards business or other fields. They tend to kind of pursue more of that grant writing stuff, whereas like old school people like me, you just kind of show up with grit and integrity, and you don't bite off more than you can chew. And some of the equipment, it's tricky because yes, it would be helpful to have a tractor to move like heavy things, but I do see with a lot of the regenerative and smaller scale market farms, again, going back to that language, a lot of that equipment almost becomes obsolete to a certain degree. It's like, do you really need to invest that much money to use that tool once or twice a season? And then the upkeep and the oil changing and the maintenance on it, it's like some farmers are kind of tending to trail away from that and go back to more of like an Amish style farming where it's like, I'm not saying like you have horses and carts. What I am saying though is that you have low impact, high density, high succession, and that kind of eliminates more of that mechanical use on the property. The flip side of that though is then it becomes more labor intensive. So it's like you kind of almost have to be in the middle. And I know I'm not hitting the nail on the head as far as like infrastructure and like grants and all that. I've always been one of those guys, if you're going to go out there and earn it, you just earn it the old school way. And, you just put boots on the ground, grit, integrity, the willingness to have an open mind and put the application to Canvas that way. But there is the part of the A20 and that city-wide panel that is definitely opening their horizons for a lot of people because there is a lot of grant writing there. One thing specifically that my project is very intertwined with this 2030 Paris Accord type thing is they just wrote $25 million in grants for the recyclable, returnable plastic containers, and they want to launch it restaurant wide within the city of Ann Arbor. So going back to my case and how I get braided into that, we offer 3 to 4 prepared foods. A lot of times that comes in cardstock or things that used to be recyclable. Landfill guidelines and recyclable guidelines are changing all the time, so it's hard to keep up with it. So now the city's implementing, and there has been other upstarts like in Oregon and Washington State, where like coffee houses serve coffee in like neon purple cups. You pay for it, they fill your cup, you put a 10-cent deposit down, just like you do in Michigan bottling if you buy beer or soda, and then you're incentivized to basically return that cup back to what looks like a clothing bin. You just slide the cup in there, it credits your card 10 cents. And it's a way to basically divert trash from going into landfills. So in our case in point, if we offer 3 or 4 prepared foods, they come in these recyclable plastic containers that can be dishwasher safe, freezer safe, microwave safe. Those people can eat that food. They can gently wash them or wash them through the dishwasher. They can return them to me. So by the end of 2025, it looks like they're probably going to get approval for 5 template models of that plastic.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll just basically like double down on our mission statement that we're trying to be a carbon neutral food system. And that will fully eradicate the one-time use plastic out of our boxes, hopefully forever. That is the target.
Mm-hmm.
And they are more of the grant writers there. You know, there's St. Joe Farm. They do about 500 vegetable CSA boxes per week, 35-week CSA. About 80% of the boxes are subsidized. So they're cost effective to people that don't have the capital to pay for that. And their whole thing is all about grant writing. Like everything they do right now for like 3 or 4 months is all grant writing. How to get their materials, how to get more equipment, hoop houses, tractors, things on property. But that takes a tremendous amount of work that a lot of farms really just don't have the initiative or time to do. I am seeing some farms like imploring like solar panels on there so they can reduce their gas bill to get like their starter plants going in the early spring because it's pretty cold up here still. So they're trying to divert systems like that, and that also requires grant writing. But again, I mean that's nothing that I've done personally.
Mm-hmm. Are there resources or elements of your local food system infrastructure missing in your area? So maybe not at the farm scale, but at the community scale?
Yeah, so some of that stuff. One, we don't have a USDA slaughterhouse that's relatively close to a lot of the farms that are here. It's usually we do about 300 free range chickens. We raise them in peas and oats and cover crops, clover. They're in what you call a chicken tractor, which is like a chain link fence. They're out in the open air. The tractor is basically just pulled into a new paddock every day. So then it's a fresh cycle of food, water. They forage, beautiful chickens, but we have to drive them to Homer, Michigan, and that is probably about an hour and 10 minutes from here, and that is the closest USDA slaughterhouse. There is a few meat farmers here that are coming together as a coalition. They are actively grant writing to get one onto an actual farm, not into like an industrial park per se. A lot of people want that for a few reasons. Like Joe Salton, he's a huge farmer in Pennsylvania. He does all of like harvested chickens on site, use the chicken innards and things that you don't eat and mix them with wood chips to create new topsoil. And that is kind of the vision of this community is that if they do slaughterhouses, there's a lot of byproduct that gets wasted and goes nowhere. We want to upcycle that stuff and basically recreate new soils out of it. So I think that's pretty fascinating. There is quite a few meat farms in this area. A lot of them are mom and pop and at small scale. which is really, really fascinating. And again, I mean, you're just eating healthier food. I mean, if the animal's outside and it's walking around and eating a diversified palette of nutrition, obviously you are what you eat. So it is interesting to see that the slaughterhouse looks like it's going to come to fruition here in the next year out here. You know, and I think by doing that, that kind of just reiterates, that there is a demand for the local food system. And it takes pressure off these farms to have to haul cattle or pigs or ducks or turkeys or chickens or whatever they're growing down to be processed. And we lose that money. That money's going out of our economy. And the host farm, there's a few farms talking about trying to get it up there. Washington Meats is one of them. Green Things Farm was another one. But those people are proactively like composting and regrowing the soil through that wasted product. So I think that would be really, really interesting to see that come about. There's also a couple of trout farms here too. That fish emulsion, is hugely desirable in agricultural systems, and he's feeding the fish an organic material, so it's not GMO products or anything like that. And then obviously the fish meal would be extremely powerful resource to put it back into the row crops or orchards or bushes or whatever you're trying to grow there. So there is work going on multiple levels. I just think that is not on most of the small scale people's horizons. And I do hear people talking about it, but it goes back and forth. I mean, I've done some projects like that where I didn't write the grants, but like I did get paid to spread pollinator wildflower seeds over hugel mounds, and specifically under like power line poles. There's some groups out here that work with DTE, and they basically write grants to re-wild underneath those pylons, which is pretty fascinating because it's like, if you look at all those pylons now, usually they're just mowed down grass areas, and the plants never have a chance to mature. Whereas, like, if you go out there and you just repollinate that with milkweed, that could make the difference between the monarch species surviving and not. And since it's no man's land that has to be somewhat organized, putting in those way stations like that, it's a good counterbalance to the monocropping system that surrounds it.
Right. And you've used an important term that I think we should define, which is once again talking about leaving some of the byproduct of the property in place so that it can decompose. You mentioned hugel mounds. Could you explain what those are?
Yeah, so hugel mounds, I believe it came from Germany. I'm not 100% factual on that. The idea behind that is to sequester the carbon and put it back into the soil. They are kind of tricky. Some people kind of think it's folklore. Some people are like, we had a huge windstorm. There's a million trees that blew down. We should store all this carbon. And really, what the hugel mound scientifically, the way that I see it, you stack a bunch of wood. It creates pressure through gravity. It gets wet. It gets moldy. It becomes a fungal network, and that means like mycelium is interacting with the wood, digesting the material, and then releasing the nutrients back into like topsoils. So the longer vision of doing hugel mound is, some people like to plant directly on top of it, especially if you're going to go into like orchards and things like that. When you grow row crops, you're growing in a fungal grow, or I'm sorry, a bacterial grow. And when you grow with wood chips and trees and things like that and shrubs, now you're going into a fungal grow. So it's actually two different things there. The last thing too, just with the hugel mound, like I actually find those to be very important reservoirs to add as like a soil amendment. So the longer the pile sits and the more it biodegrades, that stuff is really, really rich with macro and micro life. And that can be spread across your crops or underneath the understory of your plants, and you can use it as a reservoir of like decaying organic material. And it's definitely hugely impactful.
Mm-hmm. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's instead of moving the branches and the pieces of downed trees off the property, once again, sending them, in a fossil fuel powered vehicle down the road, you're keeping them on site and using them as an amendment or a benefit to the ground where they
And
fell,
that is
which is
correct.
wonderful.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And the other thing too about that too is like, say you do have trees that go down on there, depending on what type of trees they are. A lot of those trees on a lot of the properties I work on, we'll take the hardwoods and upcycle them into mushroom totems. So we inoculate them with lion's mane or oysters or shiitakes. And that's a good way, again, to upcycle the wood, not send it off the property, and biodegrade some of that organic material back into the landscape, which is really fascinating too, because mushrooms obviously are a lucrative crop. So that's a high dollar desirable crop that's a growing trend, and it's really fascinating to upcycle the wood like that.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So you are working with local farmers every day. And based on your knowledge of your area, how could we better support farmers that are using regenerative and natural growing techniques with our legislation and funding, if you see a role for that?
Yeah, with the legislation and funding there, again, a lot of it is really just kind of spreading the word as far as what these people are doing. The educational side of our stuff, a lot of people are just completely dumbfounded at how much is actually right in front of you. You just can't see it. And it's that's the trickiest part about all of it. It's like how do you get people to bridge the gaps between what a conventional system is and what a regenerative system is, and the difference in the food makeup and health benefits, the processes, how the land is interacted with. That is like one of the biggest conundrums of all of it, is because I think there probably needs to be more education in there. So one of my other projects is looking at the school system and the food system specifically, as far as what we're feeding the future of America and how much waste that system creates. The food is factory farm processed food, high sugar, high fat, high salt, highly processed, comes out of a can or a frozen bag. Growing up in Northern California, second, third, fourth, and fifth grade, I went to a school that had a 1 acre campus farm, and they proactively just upcycled all of the waste from the cafeteria, and we integrated it into curriculum where this is what happens when food goes to the landfill. But now we're going to put dry carbons on it. We're going to learn about vermiculture. We're going to bring like a system together based off of that decaying food, and then put it into the field as organic fertilizer, and then basically start the process over. So we're taking like wasted food and turning it into really good food. And then the idea of putting it into the curriculum is that, one, we're teaching the future of America how to upcycle even at home as a byproduct of learning about it through the educational system. But also, we're teaching food about respect, because if you're growing the food and then as a child you see people throwing it in the dumpster, and you've been out there trying to grow it for the last 3 months of school, some of those kids are going to look at it like that's pretty disrespectful, or like, why would you waste that? It took a ton of time. It creates conversations, but it also could be an intricate part of like backyard farming. And instead of having lollipop ornamental bushes that aren't native, now you could have beautiful flowers, or an asparagus patch, or blueberries or raspberries, and you can use your food scraps and keep them on site. So it's a kind of a crossover from the farm model to the public model, and what you can do as a consumer to like do better to reduce your own carbon footprints out there. So some of that stuff we are looking at. Some of the businesses that I work with are obviously pretty big, and they are trying to flex their muscle with the school district to try to implement some of these concepts, you know? And I mean, I just think it would be a beautiful thing. It's like, we can't feed the future of America highly processed junk food every day and expect them not to get chronic disease and obesity and all the things that are fully out of control right now. So you have to go back down to the local level, and you have to get down on the level of like, we have to change the system. And I think through some of those grants and writings and educational purposes and fundings and things like that, I think those would be extremely great gateways, because it would stop a lot of unnecessary greenhouse gas from ever becoming, as well as all the fossil fuels it takes to move that product in and out and here and there. And the bags that it goes in and stuff that we've already discussed. It's like we just have to be better stewards for the environment.
Mm-hmm. And what you just said really leads into my next question, which is, do you think it is important for farmers to have a source of funding that specifically helps them address the reduction of greenhouse gases in agricultural production?
Yeah, I definitely think that would be excellent. I think there could be ways to write the funding as well, based off of a merit system. Um, if you try to migrate to Australia, you are on a point system, is how fast you get accepted into the country. And it's about doing right by the country and what they expect you and how to act as a citizen, what kind of input, what kind of taxes, what kind of job you do. I think if we go back to that kind of system and there's merits based off of like your footprint on the environment and your do good ability, that some of the systems should kind of reward those kind of farming practices. Um, but that could get really complicated. It's like, where does the money go and how do you make sure that it goes back into a sound investment? It's not, we take the money and then write our farm into a green belt system and they cut our mortgage in half because now it can never be developed because we sold the development rights. And then, oh, we just need to go buy a new track. It's like, it would almost have to have a track record of like proofing that the money was actually reinvested into your agricultural system. And I think there's ways to do that. I mean, with this local committee that Alex from Sealy Farms on, the conservation easement, I think they have a lot of programs like that, and they do all kinds of like native plant cells to generate more money to distribute through those kind of programs, which I think is really interesting. The new administration may try to block some of that stuff or defund it, but I think that in this term, a lot of people are prepared for that and have seen the writing on the wall and have tried to take action, I guess. So yeah, that's a tricky question. I mean, I don't have a ton of experience in that arena, just because my children are 8 and 11, and I work as a farmer and I run my own business, and there's just so many hats you can wear, But I think as I age out in this profession and I have more time, I will definitely be looking to invest in some of that time and that infrastructure. But yeah, that's unfortunately I don't have too deep of a reservoir there to offer on that
Yet.
Yeah, we're getting there. Yeah.
Is there anything else that you'd like to tell us about your farm practices, or other topics and concerns related to regenerative agriculture?
I think the food systems are broken. We clarified that pretty well. I think if we don't get our act together, the system can only take so much abuse, and we have to get away from that old adage that we're in control and we dictate what Mother Nature does. I still see that with some of the older senior farmers, and it's like we don't need to control Mother Earth. We need to collaborate with her, and I think ways that we do that is we just lead by example and put out good newsletters. We put out good menus with diversified portfolios on those menus, and really just try to be an open bank of profit sharing knowledge. My template's pretty wide open publicly, and a lot of people are like, it's crazy that you share all this stuff. And what if competition pops up? It's like, yeah, but I mean, say you're a baker in town and 10 other bakers come while you open your store in 5 years. It's like, what are you going to do? It's like, at least we're trying to do something the right way. We're trying to add a bunch of transparency to it and accountability to the food system and just raise public awareness. It's a lifestyle change that I think can be adapted to any country and any model and any city, as long as people are willing to contribute and collaborate and find that those values matter, at their own home level, but also the bigger picture of what's to come for the generation behind you. My daughters are always asking me, like, why are you always looking at the soil? It's like snowy and cold, and you're out there digging a hole in there and bringing it inside and putting it in a magnifying glass. And it's like, well, if you're not studying this stuff and you don't know what's happening, it's almost a precursor to like what the season will unfold to look like. And I said, and more importantly, like when you're 46 and you go to the grocery store, half the food that's currently in circulation right now could be very much like when I was your age. It was like bananas were only here for like 6 weeks, and oranges were only here for like 6 weeks, and things weren't here every day in the exact same spot at every single Kroger around the whole country. And the only way you're going to get access to that food is if you learn how to grow it and you save those seeds and you do it like my grandpa did. You gene selected the alpha seeds, and then all of a sudden you had an alpha field. And every year that was like the most important thing you did was you gene selected and harvested your seeds. Whereas now we're entering a phase where most farmers, if they can't order it off Johnny's or Territorial Seed Company, they have no recollection of how to save that seed and gather it and store it and regrow it, which is really unfortunate. I mean, indigenous cultures have traced seeds back for thousands of years that they gene selected and traveled and walked hand and foot before they, became hunter gatherers. They became stationary farmers. And it's like that lineage is being lost. And I think it's something that's pretty important to kind of bring back. And, by doing stuff like that, you can actually get a crop rotation that may be highly desirable, and you create your own market because nobody else has that. So lots of different ways to think about it, though. I mean, it's an endless journey. There's many chapters you have to be written with many chapters behind us. And I just think the bigger focal point is that there's a lot of divisiveness across the country on many levels, on many of the systems that are in place. And I think we can all come together around clean, healthy food. It's a way to draw barriers from people and opinions and biasness. And it's a way to bring the community together and, be more responsible, be more in a group and organized and aligned. And many historians have wrote about, the 6 mass extinctions well on the way, and that a lot of these systems are being challenged and broken, and there's a lot of pushback. And this is just a good place to create a community that kind of flourishes from within. And as that model spreads out, it's an opportunity for everybody to get a chance on the merry-go-round.
Mm-hmm. And to be more physically present.
Just to be more present, and it's rewarding, to take a step back and look at all the work it takes to pull these things together and how much work it takes to grow food. When we do farm volunteer days and people come out, they're just like, I am so glad you're growing this and not me. They're like, this is hard. And people have lost that respect for the food. It's like we're a throwaway society on many fronts. It's not just our food, it's the material consumptions and things like that we take for granted. And these resources aren't going to last forever. I mean, as the population swells, the pressure and the demand on systems is going to get increasingly harder. And I think through regenerative farming, we can kind of start where it all begins and offer more of a biodiversity plateau for things to coexist together. And that basically spreads more good juju, good karma, more wildlife, a healthier system for everybody. And we just need to figure out how we can bridge those gaps, mentioning like the school district food and donating to food banks and writing really informative educational newsletters. It's all about spreading the goodwill of people working together in unity. Somebody's got to start it somewhere. And we cross over a lot of different barriers of a non-traditional business model, which usually is pretty intimidating by people that take that capital gains risk. But the thing is, it's all about doing the right thing, like when I look at the work that I do, I don't really see any negative impact besides some of our one-time use trash. But outside of that, the whole process is just about sharing an educational journey through local food systems, clean, sustainable, healthy, off-grid food systems. And the writing's on the wall. We're going to have inflation. The tariffs that are even being mentioned, those are going to drive prices up. Uh, Things like pandemics, they were predicted. They've happened. They predicted that local food groups would join together and create things that are localized and off-grid. And I really do think that that is the future of food. The future of food is like everybody within their biome goes back and supports that narrative. And it really isn't that far away either. I mean, if you look at The Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan, I mean, he discusses the upper Midwest as like circular farms, and that you do chickens, pigs, and cows, and I do turkeys and pigs, and I have an apple orchard, you have row crops. Just less than 100 years ago, all these farmers would collaborate together and grow a unified front food system that supported all of them in the process. So going to a grocery store was like a really off-site adventure. You only went there just because you needed to get materials that you couldn't produce on farm. And I think we are going to enter that age again. It's almost impossible that we won't. So we are kind of doing the seed banking for the next generation and the generations to come. And I think by doing that, this will become the norm. It's like, hey, let's go shopping at the farm stand down the road. Not let's go shopping at Bush's,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even like eggs right now. Up here in Michigan, because now they changed the law to cage-free eggs just recently. Most of the grocery stores, if they have them, they're like $10 a dozen. I can still go get eggs wholesale right now for $4.50 to $5 a dozen. Everywhere.
Right.
So it's like, if people knew that, they would go straight to that consumer right now. They wouldn't pay $10 for them.
Yeah.
And it's just one item, It's like a one staple item that most people do eat. So it's like, you can already see the cracks in the system.
Mm-hmm.
And where it's heading.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree, and I just feel like what you're doing, and you mentioned this, is a generational project. You're creating a model of stability that will grow and flourish.
Yep, and that is the bigger target. Like a lot of people are like, "Oh man, you should pat yourself on the back," and it's not even about that. It's about doing the right thing. It's about leading by example and just setting the bar pretty high. And taking like a mental challenge as well as a physical challenge to like pull it all together and stay intact with the land and your values and the way that you do things. But I also think that being an open template and sharing the model with many people, it's a very easy adjustable model to each one's own biome. And I think that's important. It gives people a sense of purpose and care and respect for the planet as well as respect for food. I mean, if you see that we're throwing away X amount of millions of pounds every year, that just tells you people don't respect the food system and the labor and the energy it takes to do it. And as more and more people get out of it, more and more factory farms arise. Like Michigan right now, I think has over like 360 factory farms doing tremendous amounts of damage to the environment. We have big old waste pool water evaporation pits where manures and peat are just supposed to disappear. And it's like, that goes into the water table, which comes back up as drinking water or damages the trout ecosystem or whatever it is. It's like those systems just aren't sustainable. And when you travel to countries like Japan and you see, like an orange can cost you like $5 or like a, prime rib steak can cost you $200. It's like, they are good case examples because their population is already spread out and maximized all the resources that their landmass can produce. And a byproduct of the cost of that produce is the cost of what it takes to actually materialize it. So as long as we keep subsidizing and doing a bunch of massage your back and I'll massage your kind of practices behind the scenes with these factory farms, the health system's always going to have an impact from that that's negative.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, I could talk
Mm-hmm.
about it forever, obviously, but I try to be positive about the system and the work that we do and try to stay in our own lane and not attack like the big pharma and all that stuff. That's not my business. My business is just to educate and divert those funds away from that. And that's how you make change within, you know. And I read case studies about how Kroger wants to be like all dry goods, and then you pre-order all your produce and you just show up and you get it. And they're going to shrink the model of the store because they know the demand is not there anymore, which is a great sign. That's a great sign that now you can't just like produce food for pennies on the dollar and mass produce it all out and then subsidize it to death and then nobody makes any money. I mean, that's just pointless. And those models will change as you shift the economics of it all, and that money starts to go back into the local community. These people now can employ more people. They can grow a diversified portfolio of crops, and that's the real vision. Is that we're cultivating not only the food itself, but we're cultivating the community through education.
Right, right. And I feel like also when you talked about visitors to your farm, the way you describe the things that they would see there, like you get it's such a sensory rich experience. And I feel like that is another factor of wellness, of human wellness, that we're not getting through the things that we spend most of our time with, social media feeds and things like that. And so you're really kind of reacquainting people with these experiences and how that is a positive environment, a positive
Yeah.
feeling.
And I mean, in the newsletters, to repetitively write about food topics, you're really basically just breaking down like college dissertation style papers of like health nutrition of the food, the seasonality of the food, the duration that it took to grow this food. So you're putting accountability onto that system. And when you start to write about it like that, like the presence that I try to give people is like you can almost like smell, taste, and see this menu coming together as a passenger eye view of like the process and what you're looking at. And I think a lot of people, it gives them an interesting appeal because most of the content we read is pretty negative. The news isn't positive. you
That's
never
true.
you never hear a feel good narrative. So like we offer 100% positive innuendos, puns, jokes.
That's great.
We set people up like they think we're going left, 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 and then we throw them like, all right. And they're like, wow, that was very interesting, but it actually makes sense. And then we try to paraphrase things like that though, so it keeps people on their toes, but it also keeps them engaged. And we can see that it's working because when we do our chimp survey, I think most of the newsletters are read about 98% in their entirety. And really all it is I'm just telling the truth. It's like, we're pulling up to Gates Farm, and this is what it looks like. There's 4 hoop houses here, and the fields are covered in this cover crop. And then the rows are, situated between the cover crop rows. And then we like walk it through, like what they're going to get and then how to cook that food.
Yeah.
We're basically given the full set and setting. And now all they have to do is just sit down and enjoy the food with a peace of mind that they know they're giving back to their community, but they're also sourcing sustainable food systems. And I think that's the biggest key to it all is like, if people want to try to replicate a model like this, you have to like really gear up to be very educational and read a lot. Like I read a lot of books about the environment and science and planting and nature. And I think a lot of those anecdotes through my travels and other things that I've done before in the past, I really lean into that reservoir and try to give people an alternative positive look on what we produce out there
Right.
on those newsletters. So really, this is almost like a humanitarian project. It's like
Mm-hmm.
social service and humanitarian. It's like, it's not the highest financial yielding work. It takes a ton of time and energy, mentally and physically, to like pull this stuff together. But the humanitarian effort to it is like it can break down racial divides and barriers and injustices to the system and the cost effectiveness of it and the accessibility to it. Like we go out to Coney Island with my family of four, and it costs us $50 to eat highly processed junk food. And here we are given a box of food for like 5 meals, or 3 meals for 5 days for $75 of like clean, nutritious, high density food. And it's like the irony to it, like
Yes,
in my
I
head,
get.
like, why are we even supporting that? Like,
Yeah,
it's just madness, and then people will tell me, oh, the boxes are too expensive for us. I'm like, it's a mindset where people have been trained to expect things to be cheap and devalue the system, whereas we're trying to put value back into that.
right. Mm-hmm. Thank you so, so much for your important work and everything you're doing, for taking the time to share your expertise with us today. It's been really wonderful to speak with you.
Yeah, I'm grateful for the opportunity, and I'd love to do it again.
Thanks for joining us. Links to the interview guests, farms, and topics discussed can be found in the episode notes. The Farm Voices podcast is produced by the Regenerative Agriculture Coalition, a working group of climate reality project leaders and chapter members. Please subscribe to this podcast, leave a review, and share the episode with others. It helps us raise the visibility of this important information, and we greatly appreciate your support. Join us in the next episode for more on the Farm Bill and farms and ranches practicing regenerative and conservation agriculture methods. Have a great week.